timidly shying away from, and embracing his true potential. And one of the first things I thought of when I read through this was, you've got the real world and you've got the mythical world. And even ChatGPT was like, well, this mythical world, it's just like a projection of human imagination, or maybe the characters even say that. And so it begs the question, is the mythical, are the dimensions of the psyche, right, just imagination? Is that something that's projected from our human condition? Or does it have its own reality unto itself? Right? So in these stories, they're fantastic stories. So it's like, well, obviously there's not a flying dog creature, in existence, and these things aren't actually real. But the mythologies that have been passed down from ancient times are considered to be real. And in our tradition, we have, and in many traditions, they have historical validation that these things actually happened. Not only are they real, but they also sort of represent or embody the different dimensions of the psyche, right? So there's another story that I love. It's my favorite movie of all time. Another show of hands, who has seen The Fountain? Yeah, you can attest. It's amazing, right? Yeah. So because most of you haven't seen it, for the next 2 hours, we're gonna. No, I'm just kidding. That would be really easy for me. Yeah. So Fountain's amazing because it very vividly and extraordinarily artistically depicts 3 worlds, which you could think of as 3 aspects of time. You've got the modern world, the current time, of the main character, who's a scientist, doctor, who's trying to find the cure for cancer because his wife is dying of cancer. And at certain points, sort of flashes back to this mythical, I would call it, timeline of him as a conquistador. And his wife is in the role of the queen, who is deputing him to go find the fountain of youth. So again, it's this search for his beloved to find, a remedy for death. Basically, he's attached to this love in the material world, and he's trying to, find a cure. And then the third timeline is very amazing. I haven't really seen this depicted quite so well in any other film, which is what you may call a spiritual dimension. And that is his soul, when he sort of pulls out from that dream world, of these 2 dream worlds, of the current time and this past or mythic time. And he's able to reflect and so forth. And then he kind of projects himself back into these timelines. It's very interesting, very cool. So what's being demonstrated here is a couple things. First of all, this is an interesting realization that came to me last weekend, is the idea of time is generally we hear, we've got linear time, and then a lot of people like to talk about cyclical time, right? That things repeat and so forth, right? We've all heard this. So, and yeah, we understand that. But from a purely physical standpoint, it's like, third, that is the eternal. That is, it's always circles. It's like, it's you, and mythical just being a projection of the imagination. What's also being displayed here, as well as in our literature here, is that these things are occurring because of the projection of consciousness through them, right? We have these realities because of consciousness. It's like this world is like a shadow. You could say it's a shadow of the real world. So wherever there's a shadow, it's indicating light, right? I mean, this is a profound idea, but we're experiencing life because there's consciousness. If you say that, oh, well, the imaginative, the imaginal or the mythic, that's just a projection. There's no actual substance to that reality. It's like, well, you could say the same thing about this reality. And people do that, right? They're generally called nihilists or impersonalists. But that philosophy doesn't really pan out so well. We can see that wherever there is this experience of a shadow, of a dark world, that means there is some light illuminating it. It's just a sort of abstract way of tying that together. So consciousness is that light, and the purpose of this world is therefore to discover your eternal self, that self that is projecting through these things. So you've got sort of two kinds of never-ending stories, in a sense. There's one type where you're constantly repeating these same stories, these same narratives over and over again, and another where you enter into your authentic self, right? Your actual true self, where you're no longer projecting into these dualistic worlds. So what is inhibiting our eternal self? Right? So the idea that this world is trying to convey to us is you are inhibiting your own self by participating in these loops of karma, which is due to, again, dualistic minds. You're thinking, I want this kind of experience and I don't want this kind of experience, right? So you're dividing your worlds. And because of that, this experience that you're pushing away is going to keep sort of like a nemesis presenting itself to you until you accept that reality. And so in the fountain, what is that? It's very clearly death, right? He's struggling against death. Death is a part of this world. There's no getting around that. And so eventually he does embrace death in both of these timelines, quite dramatically, and transcends the world. So the identification with fear. So again, these stories, we're identifying with these stories. So we all have different narratives in our life, right? It's just natural. Some narratives you get from your biological, physical, linear timeline, right? Like, I'm an American, I was born, in the upper middle class. I have all of these aspects of my past, like this character was a scientist, he's a husband, right? And he's identifying with that story. And we have these more subtle stories, that are playing out over and over and over and over again. And we identify with the fear aspect of that. And so I want to break that down tonight a little bit more, as opposed to identifying with the spirit. So fear, as we know, gives rise to different addictions. We're afraid of certain experiences. And so this can, progress, in a spiral to, latching on to, again, one type of experience, and it just gets denser and denser and denser. But not only physical addictions, but also mental addictions. And I wanted to read from this wonderful book, Breathing Underwater by Richard Rohr, which is a book on spirituality and the 12 steps.
Richard Rohr is a Catholic. He's a Franciscan monk, correct?
Yes, Franciscan friar. So he's speaking on addiction in Catholic terms here. So, is it this human pain of which we are afraid? ? Powerlessness, the state of the shipwrecked, is an experience we all share anyway if we are sincere. But Bill W., founder of the 12 Steps, found we are not. He called it denial. It seems we are not that free to be honest or even aware, because most of our garbage is buried in the unconscious, right? Like these subtle stories, right? These mythical stories of these timelines. We're not aware of these past lives. We're not aware of these dimensions. So it is absolutely essential that we find a spirituality that reaches to that hidden level. If not, nothing really changes. Never ending story. It is not necessarily bad will or even conscious denial on our part. We just can't see what we are not forced to see. As Jesus put it, we see the splinter in our brother's or sister's eye and miss the log in our own. The whole deceptive game is revealed in that one brilliant line from Jesus. We seem to need something that forces us to deal with that log. For many, if not most people, the only thing strong enough to force them is some experience of addiction, some moral failure, or some falling over which they are powerless. We are all spiritually powerless, however, not just those who are physically addicted to a substance, which is why I address this book to everyone. Alcoholics simply have their powerlessness visible for all to see. The rest of us disguise it in ways and overcompensate for our more hidden and subtle addictions and attachments, especially our addiction to our way of thinking. We were talking about this the other day, that stinking thinking, right, that we're all so addicted to. I'll read a little more. We all take our own pattern of thinking as normative, logical, and surely true, even when it does not fully compute. We keep doing the same thing over and over again, even if it is not working for us. That is the self-destructive, even demonic nature of all addiction, and of the mind in particular. We think we are our thinking, and we even take that thinking as utterly true, which removes us at least 2 steps from reality itself. We really are our own worst enemies, and salvation is primarily from ourselves. It seems we humans would rather die than change or admit that we are mistaken. All right, Krishna. So this experience of fear, of avoiding that fallenness, avoiding that part of ourselves, that falls, that is lost, that loses, is basically the experience of separation from God, right? And this world is put that in front of you, to deal with. It does that on a fundamental level, is parsed through the 2 genders. Not only the 2 genders, but the 2 principles of Prakriti and Purusha. Right? So I'll walk through this. So the first is humiliation. And this is the experience of the masculine or the adult, whereas the feminine and the child experience fundamentally grief. So let's take a look at these 2 stories. Right? We have, in the first story, the never-ending story, we have an actual child. This, yes, this mic stand constant. So the experience, of grief is just constantly, depressed. So right, so that's the pain of loss, right? So as children or as women, that vulnerability, the experience that goes along with that is loss and the grief of that. Whereas with the masculine or the adult, the experience of not being good enough, right? Which we all experience, whether you're in a male or female body, right? We've all experienced both of these. Because again, the genders are principles. But primarily with the genders, especially if you're not in the renounced order. The renounced order, you're really balancing these 2 principles in one body. Whereas in the householder, you're sort of parsing that out, into the two. And so one is going to be more polarized in that experience as the other. So, so these are the experiences. And then what occurs is we take life challenging that fear as life happening to us rather than life happening for us, right? And we take this role of a victim, again, with this experience of fear, either in humiliation, you're not feeling good enough about yourself, or in grief, feeling, you've lost your connection with that ideal, with God, really. And we just try to get through, right? We just try to get through life, do the bare minimum, just say, let me just make it through the day, right? And then we wonder, is this as good as it gets? Whereas for the one who takes a proactive approach to life, life is happening for us to break through, not just to get through life, but to have a breakthrough. And when we have that breakthrough, we connect with our true self, right? Which takes us beyond our present capabilities, not just shirking and being, playing the small self, but becoming a greater self. How? Because that light of spirit is shining through, and it's waiting to empower us. It's waiting to author a radical story in our life, and that is authenticity, right? Having the real author in our life write our story, not just avoiding these aspects of life and just hopefully making it through and, getting some pleasure along the way. Okay. So, so this is the higher power. And when we break through the dualities of the mind, we discover our true identity by contacting 3 levels of spiritual reality, which we're all pretty familiar with. I wrote this class, considering there might be new people here, but it's always good to refresh. What are these 3 levels of divine reality? Wants to just shout one of them out. Brahman. Balarama. And Balarama. Yes.
Yes.
Go. All right, 2 points for Balarama. Not of them. Okay, so supposed to know these things. So Brahman, right? We have this experience of total interconnectedness, right, and unlimited potentiality, right? And this is you're tapping into the eternal aspect of yourself, right? That you're not bound by these stories. You can change your story at any time, right? Then that experience goes one step further when we experience that there is a supreme being, higher than me. It's not just the light of my own self. There's a supreme being, right, who then enters my life as grace, right? Enters our life as grace. And we can begin to have this personal connection with him, meaning my own connection with God, that, I'm remembering him, and the more I do, the more grace flows in my life, and the stories that I'm in just kind of get worked out in a really, really magical way. Then there's a 3rd level, and this is Bhagavan, that this being has a personality, and that not only is he entering my world, but I can enter his world, right? Which is the reservoir of all pleasure, all play, all love for all souls. And when we say all love, we're not talking about the love of this world, which what we call love is generally attachment. We say we love something if it's simply in the context of our story, if we're not conscious of our higher reality, that's transcendental to this world. When we speak in terms of love, we're speaking through the lens of our small character. It's just a temporary role. To say that you love something is really trying to speak to you, the soul. It's because love is the activity of the soul. So if you're not acting on the platform of the soul, you can't quite call it love, right? Not to say that love can't express in this world, of course, but it does when we're connected to that Supreme Being. So I wanted to read something more. I think you'll all get a lot out of this. This is very rich. This is coming from Radical Personalism, Revival Manifesto for Proactive Devotion by Swami Padmanabha. And Maharaj describes radical, or rather defines radical, in its original Latin root, radix, which refers to the root of something, not just, oh, that's rad, man, or this kind of idea, right? Radical means the most of your own nature that you can be, right? So radically personal, is really getting to the core of what it means to be a human being. And he's making the point in this opening chapter that Gaudiya Vaishnavism means radical personalism at its core. It's this apex of radical personalism. So, okay. Yeah, I want to read this first. He's quoting Sridhar Maharaj, Sridhar Swami. It is all personal. Everything is conscious first, then there is matter. Everything is representation in the original, personal, conscious, spiritual reality. Everything is a unit of consciousness. Everything has personal existence. In the background, everything is a person. And so he's talking about our philosophy, that when we see everything that we're seeing, behind it is a personality. And this is fundamental, Gaudiya Vaishnavism. There's a person behind everything. And, with God, that is absolutely the case. So, similarly, the Gaudiya appreciation of God's personhood in terms of radical personalism is even more complex, abundant, and comprehensive. Okay, yeah, many volumes would be required to do justice. So skip down a little bit. Okay, refer to as Sri Krishna is as much a person as he can possibly be, a totally diversified supreme individual who becomes so engrossed in loving relationships with each of his devotees that he ends up being unaware of his own godhood, lost in a human-like fabric known in Sanskrit as lila, divine play. This lila could be even more accurately depicted as celebratory movement, where the sweet absolute Krishna embraces divine oblivion and self-forgetfulness due to the weight and impact of divine love. And as a result of this, he perpetually acts, moves, and dances in celebration of his own inner overabundance. He wants me to read a little more. Haribol. This is so good. It is in this passionate and enigmatic frenzy that God somehow transcends his own godhood, becoming all that. This particular face of the Absolute has been referred to as Godhead. The Absolute here is not merely God the Supreme, but God exhibiting the supreme side of his personality at a particular moment in his eternal life. In Sanskrit, prema is one of the main terms for divine love, and su is a prefix intensify the meaning of there's a missing word. Intensifies the meaning of a Sanskrit word. I'll buckle your seatbelt, Balgopinath. If you put the two of them together, then you have suprema, supreme, or excessive love, a love supreme. Thus, we could say that something qualifies as supreme as long as it includes this abundance of affection. And since God himself is not willing to be an exception to this particular rule, the supreme side of his personality is what is the most affected by loving interaction. If this is not yet enough of a dose of radical personalism, say Haribol. Okay, I'll read on. Gaudiya Vaishnavas entertain the possibility of going even a step beyond God's individual personality. The sweet absolute, as Sri Krishna, is never alone. He is classically depicted in the company of his greatest lover and female counterpole, Sri Radha, who personifies God's own love potency interacting with his own self in divine play. Radha's love is so deep and ever expanding that Krishna becomes haunted by the possibility of relishing an experience of himself from the vantage point of her love, to know himself through a new set of eyes and heart. And this in turn gives rise to yet another expression of his multiple faces, known as Gaura Hari, an additional intricate layer in the theological constellation. Thus, if for the above reasons or any others there is a place to describe Sri Krishna, or even the dyad of Radha Krishna, as the apex of radical personalism, we could rightfully say that Sri Gaurahari then constitutes the overflowing of that apex, the meta-climax of all specified experience, or in other words, the personalism in the form of God's very existence, eternal unfolding. Hare Krishna. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. So this Bhagavan is characterized by this immensely intricate, loving expansion and expression in personal relationship. And so this is the true never-ending story that we can enter into. So what I'm wanting to convey through this class is the possibility of an amazing never-ending story that we can enter into with the apex of Supreme Personhood, Sri Radha Krishna. And that what is, again, inhibiting this is the mind, is experiencing fear, which, as we know from Srimad Bhagavatam, is indicating separation from Krishna. Where, as Lord Krishna tells Brahma, wherever you're experiencing fear is simply because you're not seeing the connection to me. And he says, this is called Maya. Not that this world is Maya, this life is Maya, yours are Maya. When you're not able to see your connection with me, Krishna says, that is Maya. That is going to cause you fear. And really, you have nothing to be afraid of. Because I'm always here. In these aspects of Brahman, Parama, and Bhagavan, always available. Always available. So, a few points that I have been learning from a wonderful teacher of mine in regards to humiliation and grief and how to work with these energies, with these experiences, is that when we experience humiliation, when we're in this role of either as a male or as an adult, we have responsibility in this world. We feel ourselves, not good enough for said responsibility. What is life trying to teach us? If it's not an experience happening to us, if it is indeed happening for us, how do we rise to the occasion? And that is to transform humiliation into humility. And that humility is rooted in a polaric duty to and dependence on the real hero of the story. And if we think we're not good enough, it means you're trying to be the hero of the story, right? And you're never going to be, because you're not the real hero. Krishna is the real hero. You can see and appreciate that, then there is no place for humiliation. What's left is the humility of, wow, what an amazing Lord, and what an amazing potential for me to grow into as his servant. So there is simultaneously this aspect of duty, rising to the occasion and becoming a better version of yourself and manning up, as it were, to take responsibility, and at the same time, total dependence on God. So perfect example of that is my own humilified self in preparing this class. It's like so much duty, like I have to present this knowledge, and then being totally humiliated at my inability to do so, and realizing simultaneously that I'm completely dependent on God, completely dependent on Krishna's mercy, if something is going to come through in a clear and concise way. So but you have to do it. You still have to do it, So there's this polarized, sort of thing going on. And that's the male brain is wired for that. It's wired to have these like two things going on at the same time. Whereas the feminine, or you could say the child experience, which again, we're experiencing both of these, of grief is transformed by, actually not transformed, is handled in a spiritual way by redirecting and expanding that grief to reflect the soul's natural search for divine connection. So the grief is not the problem. It doesn't need to change. It simply needs to reflect the truth of this world, that I am separated from Krishna, that I have lost my beloved Krishna, and I have been for so long ascribing this experience, this feeling, to things of this world, and grieving over, the loss of my dog or my girlfriend or boyfriend, and, that I can finally repose myself and say, yeah, Krishna, you have to learn to direct this feeling to Krishna and to expand it, because grieving over, I'm sorry, girls, not fitting into your jeans anymore is a small experience of what is worthy of grief, right? Krishna tells Arjuna, you are grieving for that which is not worthy. You're mourning for that which is not worthy of grief. The loss of the body, the loss of your clothing. The body is just like a very superficial aspect of yourself, like a pair of jeans. And the loss of that is not really worthy. What is worthy is the real pain in this world caused from separation from Krishna, forgetfulness of Krishna. So your grief should double over. It should 10,000 times expand, and we can only have that experience when we feel sheltered by God. Otherwise, it would totally destroy you. As Radharani tells Krishna, this emotion is going to destroy you if you try to enter into it. So she cloaks him in her aura, you could say. So likewise, the feminine in this world, the children in this world, our scriptures say must be protected. This is why, because actually it's they're inferior, because they're far more precious, because the actual reality of spiritual life is feeling separate from Krishna, feeling this very emotion. Vipralamba bhava, it means grief. And women naturally get it. They naturally have bhava. Men do not. So they are more important in our society. And when you see with that lens, everything in these books makes sense. If you don't, everything will appear backwards, misogynistic. That's not what the scriptures are conveying. Actually, the feminine experience of God is far more valuable. That is why they need to be protected. Same with children. Obviously, every society understands the experience of a child is precious. Protect it, right? Okay, so the last point in Krishna is that the spiritual masters explain the fast track to having this breakthrough is bhakti, to Bhagavan, via the company of the sadhus. So, what is that saying? We have these levels of divinity always accessible to us, the Brahman, the Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So, remembering your spiritual nature, right, which you could say is like Brahman, or having this individual connection with God, praying and so forth, to this pseudo-personal conception of God is very good. But what is so far more powerful is bhakti, right? And that's why we're having these classes. That's why we're doing what we're doing, is so we can expand this the moon rays of mercy throughout the world, right? Because what is occurring here is the best way to discover who you are is in a loving relationship. So when we're trying to connect with divine reality, what are we doing? We're trying to have an experience of who we are beyond this world, right? Independent of this world, transcendental to this world, the real, authentic self. All looking for the real, authentic self. And we're, again, going about that by means of interacting with the material energy, not going to work. Eventually it's going to frustrate you. Maybe it'll break you down to the point of addiction, and you'll realize, I need a higher help, and you'll turn to God. But much more powerful way to discover who you are is not to get beat down, but to be lifted up in relationship. When you love someone, when you give yourself to someone, you instantly discover who you are. How many people have understood something about themselves in this way so much quicker than anything else, just by giving yourself to someone? It's like, wow, I didn't know I had that in me. Or it's like I heard from this one woman in our movement after they had a child. It's like, I, fell in love with a whole new person. Like, I never knew this side of him, as a father. It's a new aspect of his person, So this is what's occurring in Bhakti Yoga, is that we're actually entering into loving exchange with Krishna, and that is going to evoke in you parts of yourself that you did not know existed. And in the company of sadhus, a sadhu is someone who has Krishna. Sadhu is someone who knows Krishna, is in a relationship with God, and they are extending that relationship to you. It's not, with Brahman, Paramatma, you're pretty much on your own. As far as discovering God, discovering yourself, it's an internal, struggle. But with the sadhu sangha, with the association of sadhus, they're extending that same personality of God to you, in pure love, right? So, and furthermore, simply by associating with Krishna and his representatives, one is given a role in that spiritual story, in that spiritual world. You are given automatic entrance to that. It's not like you're just making up your story as you go, or it's being revealed to you piecemeal as you are remembering God. But in Krishna's supreme planet itself, we are given entrance into his Leela. It's quite an amazing thing. It's, I'm speaking some words, what I understand of that. But that's, if I were to really understand that, I could tell you that that's something very, very, very wonderful. So, and a story that illustrates that so perfectly, and this is part of why I hold these ideas together for the class, is because I just read the story of Putana in the Krishna book, which is not here. You all know Krishna book. The story of Krishna's activities as they were displayed in this world. So, do all of you know Putana story? Yeah? Okay, so I can tell. So Putana was a great and terrible demoness witch, right? Whose specialty was killing babies, apparently. So her story, you could say, as far as her historical, the linear timeline of her life as just a terrible ogress, and the subtle, mythic story of the archetype that she was, is just through and through evil witch, right? She goes to Krishna to kill Krishna, right? She's sent by King Kamsa, just go kill this baby, gonna be the death of me, right? And so she goes and she smears her breasts with poison. She's like, I'm foolproof. You're gonna go up to the little baby and have him breastfeed. Finished. This poison will kill anything. So she accomplishes getting there before Krishna, and she brings him to her breast, and Krishna sucks out the poison, sucks out her life airs, and she's like, really freaks out and flailing on the ground, and assumes her true form, which she had shapeshifted. Yeah, massive body, just like crazy. It's like, that was inside there. All the cowherd villagers are just like stunned. And again, so like there's a few things going on. Is that you can't judge a book by its cover, right? We see people and we're trying to judge them based on their linear timeline story, just the impression we get. Oh, this person's wearing his clothes. He's probably always had a good life, Just like, who does he think he is? You don't know what this person has gone through, only by getting to know them. It's like, actually, he had a tough background. He's actually a really humble person, He's got an inner world that's like a sanctuary, So, talking of course about Govindaman. So still, if it was only just about that level of reality, the story would have ended with Krishna finishing it. Because he basically said, this girl's got nothing going for her. I'm just going to finish it right here. Take her life there. She's just going in a bad direction. But one thing here is going for her. So somewhere in that twisted heart of hers, at a certain point in her past, which if anyone gets this, super bonus points, you get my dessert. She had a desire to engage with the Lord in a maternal way. There was somewhere in her history that she said, I want to breastfeed that little baby Krishna. And she got the opportunity and she took it. And there is a part of her totally unknown to her. It was buried so deep, she didn't even know that she was approaching him with affection, with bhakti. And Krishna said, I'm going to take that and I'll wipe everything else out. So he took that bhakti. And what is bhakti? Bhakti is eternal life. That's the first verse of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. The authority on Bhakti himself, Mr. Bhakti himself. You could say Bhaktavatar, Bhaktavyam. Anyway, I don't remember the verse, but that's Narada as Srivas here. So Narada says Bhakti is eternal. So what are we looking at here? We're talking about never-ending stories. Right? We have our stories in this material world, gross and subtle stories that are temporary, right? We can try to exploit them, we can try to enjoy them, but they're going to end. And while we're here in this human form, we have the opportunity to discover a higher life and paint the colors of divine emotions onto the canvas of the soul in the spiritual world by the hand of God, by his mercy. That is spiritual life. And the Sanskrit word for the what that is called bhakti. Right? The bhakti is the entering into the reclaiming the evolution of the soul's eternal story, its true, authentic identity that exists eternally, can never be taken away from you. It is eternal. It is never ending. Everything else can be taken away. Even Brahman, Paramatma realization does not matter. You can fall back on from that because you don't have an eternal position of loving exchange in the eternal spiritual world with all souls. And that the more paint on that canvas, the more that light shines through. The light of Brahman is through all of us, right? That's just spirit, and God is behind us, Paramatma, shining through every individual soul. There is light that is animating, that is the consciousness. You're a very precious living entity. But when you start coloring in the love of Krishna in that soul, sublime things occur. And you have that forever. So, yes, so we, in this tradition, cultivate a daily practice, right? That is purposed not simply to go beyond this world, and not simply to have this sort of moral duty to think oneself superior and avoid these inner shadows, these inner, Mr. Nothing demons and putanas of the world, but to go beyond them, to dissolve our bonds to them, and simultaneously connect with Krishna. So, namely by hearing and chanting. So I was also thinking that these humiliation and grief, that the just principle, basic spirituality 101 injunctions, or what's the word? Suggestion, recommendations, is for humiliation to humility and polaric duty and dependence on God. Study the scripture. Read Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is, or any spiritual scripture, listen to the word of God. He's going to speak to you. He's going to teach you how to be in that position, because that's right in Bhagavad Gita. He's like, I've got a duty to do, and at the same time, I'm totally dependent on you, right? Krishna's like, I'll give you everything that you need to know, right? And grief, the experience of grief, to redirect and expand it, chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. With the mood, or in the mood of this grief and separation from Krishna, right? In the mood of longing, okay? Not in the mood of distraction, because because this is the struggle, right? We experience grief in this world, and we say, let me cover it over with ice cream.
Oh, there's ice cream.
I'm talking about myself at Mantra Oasis. No, I had one bowl. No. But this is what occurs, right? We feel tough emotions, and we say, what is the quickest distraction that can hide these emotions from me? To say, no. That is not the way of perfection. The way of perfection is feeling deeply. This movement of ours is a movement of deep feeling. The deeper, the better. The point is redirected to Krishna. This is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the avatar of. He's the avatar of deep emotion directed in longing to Krishna. So that is ultimately the only experience that matters. Chant Hare Krishna in the mood of longing towards Krishna. And for those of you who are a little more left brain oriented like myself, study the scripture so that you understand thoroughly how to direct yourself to God. Okay, Jack. Thank you so much. Questions, comments, critiques? Omar, you're just pouring forward with them, please. Yeah.
So it seems like detachment is like a big theme in this philosophy, or I guess like being detached from material things, maybe. But like, I feel like whenever you love something, like you were saying, you become attached to it. So it's like, how do you reconcile the idea of like detachment with, and then also like loving but requiring attachment?
Thank you so much. How do you reconcile detachment from things and at the same time loving them? Basically, yeah, gross oversimplification. considering this while I was preparing for class, that this might be a blind spot in the class. So yeah, this is important for us because too often spiritual topics can give the impression of just detach from this world. Look, it's all temporary. All that matters is God. Connect yourself with God. Go back home, back to God. Horrible, right? The actual reality is much different because, again, the reality of this world is that the light of consciousness is shining through. The point of this world is not to just detach from the experience of these filters, but to transform your consciousness so that your interaction with them is manifesting the light of the soul, you could say, which is to say that your love for God is pervading everything that you do. That is what the spiritual masters call true renunciation. When every experience you have in this world is pervaded by God consciousness. And yeah, so that's the reality of everything. Krishna created this world not as this like cold, mechanistic, like, yeah, this is just going to have to be a place where people suffer and they hopefully sooner or later, like they remember me and, come back, just get out of Dodge. No. He created everything out of outpouring of love. That everything in creation is simply Krishna's love, just, sprawled out. So that is the actual reality of life, is that we're meant to return, not to somewhere other than here. You can't be somewhere other than where you are. You have to shift. Where did I read that? I think it might have been in this book. Might be like deep in here. That he quotes Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami. And he's saying that the only thing necessary, gosh, so good. Because we have this experience of the world as being flawed or imperfect, or, there's evil in the world, people are suffering. Obviously, this is not the Garden of Eden, right? So most spiritual teachings are like, you just get out of here, His statement was so radically opposite that. He's saying there is nothing wrong with this world. Only your perception of it. People dying and genocide, it's like, are you kidding me, Maharaj? Like, how can you say that? He's saying nothing is wrong with this world. Everything is pervaded by God's love. And it's like, he's speaking from such a deep level, right? But we, at a certain point, we have to kind of take with faith, that he knows what he's talking about. That the experience when you do that work of transforming your consciousness, of existing simultaneously, you could say, as servitor of God and prema bhakti, and being in this world as a servant. There's not, because again, if you're just saying, oh no, there's something wrong with it, you're avoiding part of God's reality, aggregating a part of your consciousness. So I don't want to deal with that. Better I become a religionist, better I become a so-called transcendentalist and get out of this world and not deal. That is not our philosophy. We say, no, there's something to be discovered there. It's very important. That's also precisely what Jesus Christ exemplified. He went where the pain was. He went directly for the pain. He's like, where does it hurt? Let me go there. Here's Ashur.
No.
Thank you.
One question and one comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Prabhupada, His Holiness Srimad Prabhupada Saraswati, great associate Lord Chaitanya, he said, people may say this about the world and that about the world, but as far as I see nothing but joy everywhere I step.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, on the other side of things, Prabhupada paints a very different reality. Prabhupada's classes are not painting that reality. Prabhupada says, wet stool or dry stool, material world is the material world. And of course, there's different places in his books where he says, you know, in all reality, there is no material world. It's only the spiritual world.
Yeah.
But I think that for different levels, you know, there's different places of being. You know, for someone who's new to Krishna consciousness, they have to understand. I mean, Krishna says, "What's an object of knowledge? The perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease."
Right.
Krishna says that's a symptom of knowledge of God consciousness is perceiving evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So when devotees see the material world as it's Kali Yuga, this is a place of suffering, and like that's not necessarily, you know, not our philosophy. That is our philosophy, but it's just at a very different level. You know, for the Madhyamadikari, he only sees Krishna, or the Uttamadikari, he sees Krishna everywhere. But for the Madhyamadikari, distinctions have to be made because otherwise people, you know, so there's, you know, like kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So on the ultimate issue of things, you know, there really is no material world. There's material energy, but there's no, that conception of a material world that's separate from the kingdom of God doesn't exist, because even though material energy is temporary, its eternality and the existence of God is there. But that's something that I can speak about kind of in a lofty way, but realizing is something that really belongs to those who have attained prema.
For sure.
And then my question is,
Well, a quick comment to that. Yeah, it's philosophically, but Richard Rohr actually also makes the point often that in order to enter into the non-dual consciousness, you first have to establish dualistic consciousness. You first have to understand why the world is evil, in a sense, in order that you don't just spiritually bypass or philosophically, you know, be in this non-dual consciousness. You actually have to understand both extremes in order to hold both of them.
Bishop Undershard confirms this. Once you learn the process of knowledge, the
Exactly.
process of ignorance,
Exactly. Not just that you hold one ideal and say, oh, it's all great, so I don't have to go there. It's like, no, you have to go there. You have to actually experience the pain and suffering.
It's also like in my classes, especially I get classes in San Diego, the point was made that, you know, like people want to be positive, but the true positivity is truth. And so the question is you mentioned this feminine, masculine. I appreciated it a lot. I felt that I really needed to hear that. Especially being in the ashram I'm in, you know, there's a lot of intense battles that are going on all the time. And you know, internal wars that the brahmachari must strive to fight. And you know, I was thinking to myself, lately I've been thinking a lot about how we're not this body and we're not this mind, and been realizing that a lot, and how, you know, the river's flowing into the ocean, and the ocean's undisturbed. Desires are there, battle, you know, there's so many struggles, but we're undisturbed. And that's the ascending duality aspect of things. The mind has to become strong to ascend duality. But, you know, I've also been thinking about, like, when I'm seeing some of these younger devotees come through, like, not realizing, like, you know, hearing about their backgrounds, you know, they have really, like, peaceful childhoods, you know, kind of, like, reflecting back on my childhood was very hectic. And, like, realizing that actually, like, I'm into the terms of the fact that is affecting me very deeply now. And it's causing me great challenges in my life. And, you know, realizing that, you know, like, sometimes the grief, you know, like, it leads to humiliation. There's something there in the child that is between, trying to put it right, that, you know, you've correlated grief and humiliation and child or masculine and feminine energy. And, you know, I've been realizing, you know, like, trust as a result, or grief, but then that kind of grows into this sense of feeling not good enough. Like, if you have something, if your mom leaves you as a kid, or your dad leaves you, or you're neglected or something like that, then, you know, what comes from that is that you don't feel good enough later on. Yeah. So there's some correlation there, and, you know, you're obviously very, very learned in the matter. Such a nice class. I really feel very inspired and very happy. I think it was one of the best classes I've heard in Krishna Cove for sure. So, but if you can just kind of perhaps explore that topic a little bit. There's some correlation, you know, like, that if we have grief later on, it really goes into that feeling of not feeling good enough. Like, you know, if someone's left, like, you know, I mean, we see it all the time, you know, if some person you love leaves you, then that's going to leave you feeling why, or somebody you cheated on, why am I not good enough? And that can just like perpetuate into everything you do. And so there's some correlations, and perhaps you can kind of at least explore it.
Yeah, well, I'm only beginning this study, so I'm certainly not very learned about it. The idea did come to me earlier today, that I believe the correlating factors, shame and both of these experiences of humiliation and grief can give rise to shame. And one point is that these aren't inherently negative emotions, right? They're meant to be constructive. It's like if you're humiliated, it's like, yeah, dude, like get humble. If you're grieving, it's like, yeah, that was real, and you need to grieve it. You need to feel the loss of that, and allow it, what was temporal, to pass away, and appreciate what was eternal, what was the love there. And what occurs, though, is that humiliation and grief become internalized, by way of shame. When shame is not processed, because what occurs in childhood is the child is told, that emotion, don't feel that. Oh, you're doing like this, stop, or being too loud, I don't want to tell a personal story. I had very, very kind parents, but it, like, just the littlest things. It's like you come home from work, stressed out, and you see the child doing anything, and you just project your frustration onto them, and they could internalize something like, oh, like I'm really, not okay. Anyway, yeah, because the child is internalizing all of the patterns of self-regulation of the adults, meaning the way that the adults deal with these two emotions, they internalize it because they're so dependent. The parents are God to the child, like literally, they're God. And so they receive everything from the Lord, their lordships. And so their experiences of humiliation and grief, get sort of outsourced to the child when the parent doesn't know how to self-regulate and sort of separate themselves from their child, and you get all of this like very toxic enmeshment and traumas and so forth that sort of get solidified when that shame is internalized. And so the child then becomes humiliation, becomes, whatever, self-conscious or angry. It's like there's a difference between seeing someone who's angry, who's like exhibiting anger, and someone who's an angry person, right? It's like, that's an angry person. Like that is anger personified over there, or that person is frustration. Like they're always in that state. No, it did not just happen.
Actually thinking of that person who said that earlier.
All right, Krishna. I was.
Who has cosmic? That's going to my mind right now.
Yeah, so anyway, Hare Krishna, what are you going to do?
What were you looking for? They were in here.
You can't help but laugh at it. It did happen.
He wasn't looking for
It
you
did
here, John.
Oh my God. Do you have a...
I was going to comment. That was amazing. Beautiful. A little detail about the never-ending story.
Please.
At the end of that movie, like the solution to like saving the world is the boy who's reading the book has to give the princess a new name. I thought it was very.
What do you? Yeah, I did read that. What do you take from that?
Oh wow, I took from that. It was like, well, because I watched it kind of recently after I encountered all this. It was very appropriate. I correlated it with like your initiation and being a necessary step to actually actualize things. I don't know. I'm just like
Yeah. So in case online viewers in the end of the story, the protagonist has to give the Queen of Fantasia a name, and that's how he saves. What just kind of came through for me is like he's giving continuity, he's giving new life to that like hole in his heart, right? It's like he lost his mother, that his object of grief, he was holding on to that part of his heart being lost, and now he's initiating it into new life of like, you're now this for me, and like giving it this continuous. So it's no longer, love is never lost, it maybe changes outer dress, and that's the way to save the world, is to not not exist in that mentality of just the linear time, the loss of things, but rather to redirect that loss to something eternal, in the sense that nothing is ever lost. And if you can live in that way, that your beloved lives on, like you're really getting on something there, right? Because that's the actual fact, that the love of your mother, your puppy dog, the things that you love in this world, they don't die in the sense of the truth of the object of love, because that is existing as a part and parcel of Krishna. So if we can reorient our way of understanding, and so initiation, the name giving, what that's really all about is as a samskar, as like a deep impression in your mind that you exist eternally as a part and parcel of Krishna, and that every single living entity exists the same way, and you will never lose any of your loved ones, in the sense of whatever aspect, whatever part and parcel of Krishna is shining through their different stories, that's real, that's eternal. So do what you need to do, like change your story, like ascribe names to your, archetypes and so forth. Like get creative with your mythical universe. Why not? Like in such a way that you are giving life to what's real. I don't know, those are things.
Also, as you were talking, I was thing that I heard Jim Carrey say on an album is that you have to be heaven to see heaven. And also the fountain.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a movie night.
Speaking of grief, also, like from my experience, I learned this essentially through studying chakras, but that led into the chakras, led me into a deeper level. I mean, there's Krishna consciousness in that study, but you have to be aware of Krishna's power, pervasiveness. But because every chakra is essentially an indication of Krishna. I don't want to get into that. That's a whole class in itself. That's something that would be good at yoga studios. But anyhow, the heart chakra, that deals with grief. The heart chakra is blocked by grief. And thing is that like we should understand first and foremost that the love we were feeling from who are the representatives of God. First Guru is mom, like mom and father. Also the tarot is also symbolic. There's the empress. There's the hierophant.
High priestess.
There's the hierophant. So each is actually essentially a representative of God.
Yeah, that's
And then there's the chariot, which is the Bhagavad Gita, right? The seventh member of the guru, seventh member of spiritual guidance. And then there's the hermit, so there's, I'm not going to go into that. It's a whole other class in itself too.
Yeah.
But the idea is that, when you grieve something, it's not, you're grieving actually the love that was coming with that.
Yeah.
Not the person themselves.
Exactly.
And, you know, I mean, there's materialistic grief, lamentation, which means I'm lamenting for me. You know, like, it's I lost my so-and-so, my so-and-so, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my father. And, you know, because actually we intrinsically know that they're in a better place. So we're not grieving for them.
Right.
You know, sometimes, you know, it's like we can miss them. That's like natural grief, natural, you know, the natural process. But this kind of lamentation that goes along where people are depressed and destroyed, that's because they're attached to the body. And the love is never coming from that individual. It is in a sense, but all love is coming from Krishna. And the real relationship always comes down to Krishna. And so that love that you have with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your mom, your dad, that's all a reflection of your relationship with Krishna. Every relationship in this world is a reflection of our relationship with God. And so when one realizes that actually the love is coming from Krishna. And so energy can't be destroyed nor created. The love is not gone. The love can never go. The love is always there. But when we hold on to that place, it becomes blocked. But when we realize that love is always there, it transforms. And so, like, you know, for me, the most profound experience is that my father died. And, you know, I lost my father. And that was a big, huge, that was the transformative kind of time in my life, 18, as when I'm becoming a devotee and everything. And so, but I realized, you know, I lost my father. I grew, you know, you're still on something.
Well,
If they were here, they would have heard me fine.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, I'll just end it after this. We can just keep talking. So, but but, you know, like I lost my father and then received my guru. I received so many fathers. Jagannath's my father, Gaur Sundar's my father, even Dhiro's my father, you know. And I feel that I'm not saying that there's a full relationship with them in that way, and I feel love from them in that way, coming in different forms, you know. And in fact, you know, Gurudev and my dad are, you know, 1 day apart. They were born 1 day apart. And so that's interesting. But the idea is that whenever, you know, and like, you know, losing a girl or losing that romantic side of things, it comes through Krishna. It comes through so many ways. And so whatever love is lost is just re-energized into something else. Because the love is not there.
Because Krishna is still there.
Yeah, and he's the one who's giving that. He's the reservoir of all pleasure. And so when you kind of see that all these things and you have gratitude that everything is just coming from Krishna, and whenever something good comes in your life, you just recognize Krishna behind it, then you're always happy. And then the other part of grief is that, I mean, this is a really brilliant statement, but this is true. Real grief is because it's unexpressed love. Like if you lose someone and you didn't express your love for them, then you're going to grieve. But when you feel like you've fully lived your love, there's no grief. And so what I find is that,
unless you're Radharani, then you're in a constant state of grief.
That's a different type of grief.
Well, that is the paramount principle. But I'm sorry.
That's a completely different transcendental type of emotion. That's separation from Krishna. But this materialistic grief is grieving that's like my unworthiness to serve Krishna is real transcendental. That's bhava, you know. It's actually pleasure. It's the highest pleasure. And, you know, if someone's ever got a glimpse of that in Mayapur, they can actually test. But, you know, like when you live a life of a devotee, and you let go of all the material aspects, and you realize, like, when you actually live as a well-wisher of people, you know, like when I lost my dog a few weeks ago. I don't know, I should tell you the story. It was a really amazing kind of thing that happened. But anyways, I just so happened to have all my stuff packed up. Like Giriraj was with me, Ganga water was with me, Tulsi leaves were with me, Tilak was with me, everything was with me, and I just had it. And they were like, "Oh, Maya's gonna go," and I was like, "Well, I got all my stuff," so I went down there, and you know, anyways, Giriraj. If you die with Giriraj, you go immediately back to Godhead. Wow. So, anyway, she had this amazing Vaishnava death, and I felt not a tear. I felt actually ecstatic, And I've begun to notice that whenever someone dies, whenever a devotee dies, whenever you love someone to their fullest because you're trying to give them Krishna, even if they don't take it, you've expressed the highest love to them. There's no loss, there's no grief, because you've given everything. But it's when we don't express love, especially in like a codependent relationship where there may be love, but it can't be expressed whatsoever. So people are there, and it's like, I love you, but I can't stop fighting with you.
Yeah.
And that's a horrible place to be. And so when that breaks off, it's horribly painful.
Yeah.
Because I was never able to tell you how I feel. Because I was trying to express it in all these ways, all my material desires were getting in the way. But when you let go of all that, when you become actually Krishna conscious, still a little bit, by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, then, that's why the Guru, he loves all the disciples, but he's completely detached from their nonsense. And so, real love comes with detachment. And that's just my kind of spiel on grief.
Wow, thanks so much. I'll give just a few quick comments and then we'll close the show here. That, it's because we're projecting onto others that we get engaged in those toxic attachments. We're projecting our unfulfilled needs out onto the world with things and with people, right? And then the inevitable loss of those things causes this mundane grief. What I'm seeing on a little bit deeper step with this is, because you're right in the sense that that grief is very painful, but it's not okay. Well, there's a few things here. That it's the feminine intelligence is to grieve for things, and that the experience of grief is not just like some unnecessary thing. It's actually very important, because this is how we detach. This is how we let go of these things and focus in on the real thing, which is the love. And that it's this experience of grief persists or continues as bhava. As you're saying, like it's not that it's not grief, it's just that the experience when it's directed to Krishna is bhava. And Srimati Radharani displays that in its absolute zenith as Mahabhava. But we need to grieve, actually. And it's not, like, one thing that I'm learning, it's like, we cannot take any mundane grief as insignificant, or as like unworthy, or in any way, obviously we don't want to shame people's grief, but actually it's very important. Like, the loss of a dog, it's like that can be excruciating, and it's important. Anyway, the feminine intelligence is teaching us how to do that with grace, like how to appreciate the things of this world and the connection that we have with them, and then to be sort of washed over by that, to then remain in the light of Krishna consciousness in our relationship with Krishna. And again, as we were saying earlier, the soul is a part and parcel of Krishna. So as you're saying, our true loving relationship with others is with the part and parcel of Krishna. And I want to kind of like put an asterisk of that to your statement that if we say it's just Krishna, that can be misleading. But it's not Krishna because it's a individual soul. It's that soul is a part and parcel of Krishna. That's what we're forming the relationship of love with. It's no less Krishna. It's when we become Krishna conscious, then we're able to extend that love to all souls. And grief is a very pivotal, is like, I think, the pivotal linchpin, if that's not too redundant, of entering into that experience, because that's what's going to bring the experience of bhava. We have to learn how to grieve in order to have bhava. If if you neglect your grief, you won't be able to have the experience that you had with your dog. And there's so much there to be explored, and I'm very grateful that we were able to open.
Can I just say one last comment?
Yeah, definitely.
So I mean, at least simple understanding that talking to different senior devotees about breathing, and of course, the body is going to have so much suffering. Arjuna was grieving, and Krishna said this is not worthy of grief because it's based on the body, right? So the body's going to have feelings like if I stab you in the chest or in the shoulder, or do something to you, it's going to still hurt. You can't avoid the pain. The sensation of pain is going to be there, but the effect in our service, it can't affect our service or our mission in life. And then there's like the grief of Radharani and the gopis and the devotees is based on my inability to serve. That's why they're grieving. Ultimately, they're grieving their inability to serve. And that's especially grieving the material world, the sensation of a devotee. Lord Chaitanya says, your names bestow so much benediction, unlimited names. I'm so unfortunate that I cannot, I can't chant them. I don't have any taste for them. There's a sense of lamentation and grief throughout the Shikshastakam prayers, but that's all based on service. And so materialistic grief is based on selfishness. It's based on, I am this body, and you are connected to this body, and therefore I'm hurting because of that. It's based on a selfish type of thing.
Yeah, what I'm saying, it's necessary to go through that experience. And again, you have to experience the dualities in order to hold both of them, in order to have that unit experience.
We have to go through.
We have to go through. It's not that yeah.
It's how we go through it that's the key.
Yeah.
Because if we go through it, it essentially Arjuna was going through that experience, but his solution was, I'm going to leave the battlefield. Now, if we allow our grief or our lust or our anger or our greed to any emotion actually, if we allow that to take away our intelligence, that's the lack of Krishna consciousness. And then Lord Chaitanya, that's one of the 6 illusions is lamentation. It's a symptom. To the Brahma Bhuta, he's always joyful. So the idea is that the feeling is there. Even we may cry, we may have so many things. It's nothing the devotee shouldn't condemn like crying or emotions or these types of things. The emotions are there, but the idea is that real tolerance doesn't mean we don't feel. It means we aren't affected in our service.
We redirect the feeling to Krishna.
It's like, I feel the sadness, but that sadness isn't gonna the modes. It's the same problem coming from the mode of ignorance. Ultimately, it's not gonna drive me to leave my service, to not do my activities, to give up. That's what Maya is trying to do to us in so many ways, whether it be through grief, through lust, through anger, through envy. I feel envy all the time. So what is it? How do we deal with it? I don't. I just simply focus on Krishna. I know that acting on this is going to cause, the instant you act, it's surrender to Maya. Like if you surrender to lust, then now I've created a plan to fulfill lust. And therefore, such a person, Krishna says, never feels any peace. But such a person who just tolerates, which is the ultimate trinada pisanichena, taraiva seheshnana. And that's the ultimate solution. Like Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that verse is the real ultimate solution to every problem we have.
Yeah.
And so that tolerance, that titikshava karunika, we tolerate so much pain and agony, grief, and in a more like heartfelt way, you can say that grief should never stop us from being a giver. That's how I ultimately, like in the simplest way, devotees are givers. We got to give to the people we meet. We got to love the people we meet. We got to engage the people we meet. We always have to come to the people as with a giving mentality. And when our own emotions put us in the victim mentality, which is a taker mentality, feel bad for me, give me energy. We're actually seeking energy from either grief, or we're either tacking to get it, or we're getting it through this victim mentality. But the devotee can't be in that place. So we have to have our own grief, but at the same time, we have to tolerate that and always be a giver. We can actually use that. Like if we're feeling compassion and we lose someone we love, I feel this genuinely actually in my life, doing what I do. That losing people I love, the suffering that I've gone through in the world, and having been hurt by people so badly, I consciously never try to hurt anybody, And like if I get in an argument or some disagreement, I'm never going to go to a personal attack are never gonna stoop to that level because I've been hurt. I know what that feels like. And so the devotee always has to be a giver. And so our emotions can never stop us from being givers of bhakti. And that tolerance always pays off. It's like inevitable. I've seen it actually miraculous in my life. And how when I don't respond to stimuli, Krishna immediately, within an hour, he fixes it. Because if you don't accept whatever the world's throwing at you, it has to go back. And so that's just like, it's grief. It comes down to selfish grief is poor me, and selfless grief is, I'm dealing with this, but I'm not going to let that affect my giving of bhakti. And so, the greatest saints, they're the ones that feel the most compassion actually for everybody, to see death.
Yeah.
Of course, it's in a spiritual sense, they're grieving the loss of the soul, not the loss of the body. To see a soul, like, when someone comes in that door and they get burned out, that's something to grieve over. Not just the loss of the body.
I'd like to interject here. You couldn't see it, but Donnie had his hand up. He wanted to say something, but you had your back turned.
Personally,
Say it, Donnie Prabhu.
it's whenever
Say it.
there's opportunity. They should.
What did you
All-
say?
all-
Interject something.
All I was gonna say is like, in my perspective on it, is sometimes until we can get to that point where, like, say if it's like somebody who hasn't been into devotional service or in that relationship, I can see where Balarama comes from when he says it takes going through an experience to learn the lesson, because sometimes it takes the effect for the cause to kick in behind the consequence for you to draw the wisdom of the experience. So when that happens, like when you experience that grief, I heard today, and it's ironic, something I was reading, they said grief is the ability of love having no place to go. So when you experience, like for instance,